you and telling you why I'm going to knock down one of the most cherished and emblematic deliverables that we create in the course of our careers, let's first answer the question, who is this monster who stands before you? Well, my name's James O'Brien. I work for this place as the lead UX architect. Title's a bit funny there. It means basically I'm in charge of UX for all of our 90 magazine titles. You may not have heard of us. We do have an office down here with about 600 people working in it. If you haven't heard of us, you have heard of our flagship brand, which is this. I've been at Immediate for about a year. And before that, I was a freelancer for the 13 years previous, and a couple of years before that, I was permanent. So I've been building digital products for about 16 years. Being a freelancer for that length of time means I've worked in, I reckon, about 50, 60 projects for about 30 different clients. All sorts, from in-house, small and big startups, agencies, consultancies, all sorts of places. And a lot of what I'm going to tell you today about my experience of using wireframes is based on that range and seeing both sides of that fence. I've done a lot of different roles as well. I've been a developer, I've been a designer, I've been the tame geek for a lot of this. So I've seen both sides of the fence for a lot of these things. On a personal level, I live here. It's parked here. I live there with my wife, who's American, and so she loves it on July the 4th when I dress like this. And one more thing I want to tell you about me is that I'm fascinated with the idea of communication patterns and anti-patterns. When we talk about communication patterns, it's the kind of rhythms that you fall into when you tell a joke or when you have a conversation with someone. When we talk about anti-patterns, what we mean are the interactions that you have with someone where you follow a pattern in your head that is supposed to give you the outcome you desire, and when it doesn't, when the other person responds to it in the wrong way, the pattern is so ingrained in you that you respond to it with the assumption that the other person must be wrong in some way, and you actually get this big cognitive gap where you end up thinking they're crazy, or they're a bad person, or they're a nasty person. I'm so interested in anti-patterns that myself and my good friend Martina Hodges-Shell have written a whole book about it. And the reason I bring up the book is not just because I want you to pre-order, although we are #1 in our category right now, so please do. But also because I think wireframes are an anti-pattern. Wireframes are something that we put out to other people on the team, expecting them to have a result, and they don't have the result. We get the wrong form of feedback from them, we put the wrong understanding into the people we give them to, and we end up getting a bad result and making it, oh, well, you know, that person is just an idiot. They're not. They're doing their job, and we're not giving them the tools to do it right. That, I think, is the problem with the wireframe. But on a bigger level, really, my problem with wireframes comes down to how do you define your job? Right? I want to put two different, very similar definitions of the job of UXer or information architect on the board. And when you see the one that you think represents your approach to your job, please put up your hand and tell me. So, in your job, are you successful when you deliver the best possible assets to the rest of the team so that they can go off and build something? Or are you successful when a user, no matter what process has happened before the experience reaches them, has the best experience as an outcome? So, for number one, there's no right or wrong answer here. There is, you know, these are equal options. And for number two, honestly, you know, I see a lot of people putting their hands up for number two, but you know, each of these is a valid description of, all right, it's this one. We talk about architecting happiness. You don't architect happiness by writing a document that's going to be misunderstood, filed away in a drawer, and not going to have any effect on the outcome. If we don't build things that the user actually experiences, if we don't enhance the experience that the user actually has, then we've wasted our time, we've wasted the user's time, and we've wasted our employer's money. The only thing that we need to do is whatever's necessary to improve the experience that the user receives. And that's far more about communication than it is about creating deliverables. So if we all agree on that, if we all agree that the point of architecting happiness is to put things in front of people, then all I have to do is convince you that wireframes are the wrong way to do that. So let's go up a level and say, who actually uses wireframes? Who do we put wireframes in front of, expecting them to communicate what we want out of the experience? Well, we use them with stakeholders. We use them with designers to communicate, you know, here's how the page is going to be structured, here are the things you actually need to design. We use them with developers. I've seen them put in front of users for testing. And finally, of course, the biggest group to use wireframes is actually ourselves. We use them to communicate ideas among ourselves, we use them to explore interface opportunities, and we use them often to set the IA up because, you know, it's easier to draw out a whole site than to work in Excel, in my experience anyway, because everyone hates Excel. Of those 5 groups, who can read the wireframe that we put in front of them in the way it's intended to be? This is all from my own experience, but like I say, 16 years doing this stuff, 60 different projects, lots and lots of different stakeholders. In my experience, stakeholders will tell you they can read a wireframe, and they can't. Designers will tell you they can read a wireframe, and they can't. Front-end developers will tell you they can read a wireframe, and maybe they can, but they tend to ignore it and go for the fully worked-up design anyway. Users won't tell you they understand the wireframe because they have no idea what a wireframe is. Of course, the fifth group, we understand what wireframes do. Do we? Because actually, if you look at the other four groups and the expectations we have for putting a wireframe in front of them, I begin to wonder if we really do understand wireframes the way we claim to. Let's look at those in detail. Stakeholders. Why is it a bad idea to expect a stakeholder to read a wireframe the way an IA can read a wireframe? Okay, here is a wireframe of one of Immediate Media's sites that I've put through Wirify. Here's a typical wireframe. This could be gardenersworld.com, which is one of ours. It could be youandyourwedding.com.co.uk, which is one of ours. Or it could be Olive Magazine, which is a food magazine. Anyone want to guess? That level of context is really, when you put a wireframe in front of a stakeholder, the level of context they come to any wireframe with. What they see is not what's intended by this. What we're intending to say is, here's some structure of the page. We know that the priority of the hierarchy of this page is that this thing needs to go top, and then we have these things, and then we have these things below it, and that, we have a big thing over here that's meeting your aims of including related content, advertising, everything else. What they see is a website with all the colour and text taken out of it. And then we tell them the greatest lie that the robot devil ever convinced the world was true. We say, this is not indicative of layout. Really, it's not. And so what do? They read it as though it's an actual website. And they start making decisions based on things they think are important about a website. They start saying, is that image at the top big enough? Should the column on the right-hand side be on the right-hand side? Do you think we need 4 lines of text instead of 3 there? Your non-visual artifact is now telling them how they're going to make their design judgments. At some point, this artifact is going to go down to a designer with all those judgments pre-made for them, and your designer isn't going to be very happy. If they're making those visual judgments from the wireframe, they're not making the judgments that we expect them to make. They're not thinking properly about the hierarchy, they're not thinking properly about the language, they're not thinking properly about the information architecture of the site. If they don't make those judgments at the level of a wireframe, when are they going to make those judgments? They're going to make those judgments when you put something very familiar in front of them, something that looks like a real website, a Photoshop document that your designer has put together. He's not going to be happy when the big judgments start coming in and he has a load of rework ahead of him. Even if they do start making those judgments that we want them to make, how valid are they? Because if we're not locking down pixel judgments, you can't tell where the fold is. I know stakeholders will talk about the fold and we go, there's no such thing as the fold. That's laziness on our part, right? When a stakeholder talks about the fold, what they're questioning is the hierarchy of the page. And they can't make that judgment if we aren't locking down pixel dimensions on the screen. So judgments they do make are still going to get pushed down the line to the designer. On the other hand, if we make them visual representations of the page, if we say, all right, fine, we're locking down the pixel dimensions, that happens. So I think using wireframes to communicate our ideas and get sign-off from stakeholders is bad. I think if we had a better tool, it would let us scope stuff to the correct point in the life cycle. We would make the big decisions when the cost of change is low, when it takes nothing to throw away a deliverable and recreate it. And we would make the small changes when we are finessing things. Very much what John was saying, right? Design it properly first and then finesse the little bits and pieces at the right time. So second group that we use wireframes with, designers, who are looking a little bit happier now, not for long. Again, we put a wireframe in front of a designer and we say, here is our non-visual asset. We write them a little letter, a little love letter that says, dear visual thinker, please accept this non-visual representation. Don't treat it as a visual guide. Go nuts, use your expertise, bring value to this project. Oh, except when we went for sign-off, the stakeholder said that this, and this all had to be exactly as it is in the wireframe. Bye! That just doesn't work. From a designer's point of view, if one bit is a visual guide, all of it is a visual guide. The rest of the content still has to fit around that stuff. And we don't, in wireframes, say this is the bit that the stakeholder signed off and this is our statement exactly right. We just say, here's the wireframe, here's the structure of the page. If one bit of it is a visual guide, the whole thing is a visual guide to the designer. Which means that what ends up happening is we say, open your box of Crayola and colour this in, please. And they don't like that very much. Why don't they like that? Because designers, like everyone else on the project team, is looking to add value to what we're making. They want to bring their expertise and feel that it has a measurable outcome in what we build in the end. All of us want to do that, right? That's why we put effort into our day jobs. And designers will not stop adding value just because you put something in front of them that dictates what they should do. They will find other ways to add value. They will find ways to reinterpret the wireframe, which means because we've said the stakeholders think this bit's important, but I think all of it's important, they will decide, they'll make their own judgments about what's important on the page or not. Stuff will get moved around, the hierarchy will get changed. Stuff might get dropped out if they think it's too hard or it doesn't fit or they can't make it look nice. And so they end up doing the design, they put it back in front of us, and we say, what have you done to the hierarchy of my page? This whole thing has to be reworked. Designers love reworking finished designs. So for working with designers, what are we looking for? We're looking for something that balances our skill sets, that lets them make smart decisions about the emotional aspects and the aesthetic aspects of the page without damaging the solid decisions that we've made around information architecture, language, and hierarchy. I will talk, by the way, at the end about what a better tool might be. Spoiler alert, there isn't just one. Developers. So I said earlier that developers, I do think, actually are able to read wireframes. Front-end developers, CSS developers in particular, are able to read wireframes if three things are met. If the wireframes are properly modular, so they say, here's a component that's going to get used on many pages, and here are the components of that component, so that you can now set up classes that actually cascade in cascading style sheets. Cascading bit of style sheets is the bit that gets missed most often, I think. If you wireframe the whole site so they know there's no surprises coming that they're going to have to fit into this structure for their CSS, and if your wireframes are representative of all content hierarchies and scenarios, so they know there are no edge cases coming out to bite them, then I think wireframes actually work quite well with CSS developers. But I have to say, that seems like an awful lot of work when there have got to be better ways to document your modular structure. And actually, these three things are pretty much the antithesis of Agile. It's basically saying up front, here's everything that's ever going to go on the site, now go and build it. Right? Things are going to change while you do development, and the developer's going to have to respond to that, and they're going to have to change the CSS structure around. So, I don't think wireframes are terrible with developers. I don't think they're great either. I've seen wireframes put in front of users, and for me that breaks the golden rule of user testing, which is you match the fidelity of the stimulus to the level of confidence you're trying to get from the test. And what I mean by that is, when you are early on in the project and you're just trying to validate whether the things you think are possible will actually work, you go with something that's very flexible. I like to go with paper prototypes because with the paper prototype you can change the flow if you need to. You can insert steps, you can take steps out, you can bring in bits and pieces on post-it notes or patches that you can change between sessions or even during a session. It's very difficult to do that with a wireframe because then you have to hook up all the interactions between this extra stage you just sent it in. When you go to a higher level and you're starting to go to usability testing, proposition testing, you need something that looks more like a website. When I worked at Which, this was what we came up with. It's sketchy style, but it looks like a website. You can understand what the images are supposed to be telling you. I would never go lower fidelity than this in front of a user, which is basically what a wireframe is. So here is that wireframe that I showed you earlier. It's actually our wedding site. Who's now excited about forthcoming nuptials? Not bringing it across really, is it? Here's what the site really looks like. Why I wouldn't use wireframes to test something like that is because, say I want to test that sign-up flow. Say I want to say, is that button prominent enough? Okay, let's go back to wireframes. Is the button prominent enough? Well, it's a grey box among a sea of other grey boxes. All right, fair enough. In real life, it wouldn't be a grey box among a sea of other grey boxes. It would be the primary call to action colour. There we go. Now it's realistic. Well, it's not that because it's the only pink thing on the page. Of course that's going to draw the user's eye. Of course they're going to click on it. That's not going to give you representative results. What about all the visual clutter that sits around it? Okay, all right, we'll add the ads in. But actually, it's also not even the only thing that's pink. So let's say the big pink thing that's on the page. There's a lot of pink on our pages, even on the wedding, by the way. Basically, you have two choices with this. You either are putting an asset in front of the user that is so unrepresentative of reality that you're going to skew your results, and you're going to give unrealistic and unusable results to your stakeholders, or you have to do rich design anyway because it's the only way to balance the visual clutter on the page and see whether users are going to respond to your calls to action or not. Skewed results are really bad because what that means is when you finish the design and you put it in front of the stakeholders and they go, this looks like it's getting lost among the page, and you go, well, we did test it, but we tested it when it was a pink box and gray boxes. You don't have any real evidence to back up the fact that your design decision is going to work. There's one other person in the room whose job it is to back up the design decisions, and it's now their problem. And they're not going to be happy about that. Am I saying you should test with fully worked up design? I'm saying yes when it's appropriate, because that's the only way really that you can get real world confidence that what you're testing is real. I'm not saying it has to be final design, I'm saying it has to be representative of the ideas that you're trying to prove. And the quickest and best way to do that is to sit down with your good friend the designer, keep him happy, pair with him, and let him have input on this stuff as well, because they are very, very good at helping us do conversion design. I think when it comes to testing, the best way to go is to match designers and architects to make sure that both sides are building a representative artifact. Finally, and this is the point where I might get lynched, what's wrong with the way we use wireframes for ourselves? The quote that I think best encapsulates this is this lovely one, which is of slightly muddled extraction. We shape our tools thereafter they shape us. What this means is, when you have an axe, you build a lot of things from wood, because axes make wood easy to get hold of and easy to shape. So suddenly, you make the axe, and suddenly all of human society is living in log cabins, is making wood fires, is building stuff from wood because it's there, it's an easy resource. What this means in terms of wireframing tools is, as soon as Balsamic comes out and allows you to drag and drop carousels onto the page really easily, every page has a carousel on the front of it, no matter what they do for conversion. The other thing this means for wireframes is, think about what a wireframe is as a document. Really, it is a flat document. Generally, it's a printable document. It's the kind of thing we're going to print out and stick on the wall. It is a series of interlinked pages that you can jump between at will. Do you remember when we used to build websites like that? It was quite a long time ago. We don't build static documents that hyperlink together anymore. We build canvases that bring in different components as necessary. And that's just content sites. If you think about application type sites, how do you wireframe Photoshop? It's a big grey box with some toolbars around it. Wireframes don't work for the kind of experiences we build anymore. At best, they will get you to state-centric thinking. So here is the home page. Here is the home page with the login overlay on it. Here is the home page with the login overlay on it with the error states exposed. It's okay, you need to define those states. That's sort of the definition of information architecture. But I don't think a wireframe is better for doing more than just exploring it. Going forward, go into something else that gives you more power. And the other thing is, I don't think any of us, well, hang on, hands up, who in this audience is just an IA? And hands up who's a UX as well. Sorry, hands up if you are only an IA. Right, hands up if you are a UX as well. Okay, so there's a lot more hands for UX than just IA. Wireframes take away the tools that we have to build experiences, right? I can help users understand a page way better if I can use color cues, if I can use emotional imagery, if I can use language, if I can use the personality of design elements and fonts, if I can use animation, if I can use sound, if I can use a million other bits and pieces. All of those things that wireframes, in their traditional sense of grey boxes, force us to drop. Which is fine, maybe, if wireframes are only there to help us structure the information architecture, but the problem is, we don't think of information architecture in isolation like that. I know that if I'm moving something down the page in architectural terms, that I may have to draw more attention to it by making it a brighter colour. If that's not captured in my wireframes, I'm going to have to communicate it to someone. If I don't communicate it to someone, it becomes someone else's problem. If it becomes someone else's problem, you all know what's coming next. Who else is the person who deals with colour? So I think, for us, we need something that reflects the medium we work in and gives us the freedom, again, to add value in the ways that we can, all the ways that we can, and not just structural grey boxes. Ladies and gentlemen, I put it to you that the wireframe's time has come and it must die. It is an old tool, and it keeps us thinking in old ways. It stops us moving forward. I think for every decision you need to make, for every brief you get, for every feature you're creating, you need to be asking yourself, what is the right deliverable to facilitate the right decision right now? This is a really important question. I'm going to go backwards to try and unpack it. When I say right now, I mean, where are you in the project? If you're on day one of the project, there's no point working out what the call to action colours are. There's no point working out what the gutters are down each side of the page. You need to be working out the overall structure of the site. Like John said, you need to be not building the T-Rex into it. So make the decisions that are appropriate for today. You don't want to be trying to design out the T-Rex at the end of the day, and you don't want to be faffing around with call to action colour and spacing at the start of the day, because that's all based on assumptions that will go away as you do more discovery through the project. The right decision means, how am I going to get the right feedback from my stakeholders that I put in front of? How am I going to communicate the right thing to the people it's being communicated to? What I mean by that is water. Again, how do I guide people to be feeding back at the right level? Again, if I put something in front of you that encourages you to go off a path that we won't reach for 50 days, by which point all the assumptions you've made have changed, then I'm not getting the right decision out of you. I'm not encouraging you to give me the feedback that allows me to add value to this project. So with those two questions in mind, where are we and what are we trying to find out? What decision do I need made? What is the right deliverable? It could be any number of things, and it may not be a document. It could be that you sit and sketch with people and you have a conversation and everyone leaves the room with the same understanding. This comes from, again, when I was at Which, and we did a week-long kick-off project with one of their business groups. And I knew this had worked as an approach when I went back into that room 6 weeks later, and they were all solving their problems by sitting and sketching together. And I knew, brilliant, they will never need a wireframe, because they know what they're building. It could be conversations or role play. This is an example of role play from within media, where we're taking the interface and we're asking questions to each other based on what the interface can tell us. So in fact, what you've got here is Katie, who's in the front, is talking to Vicky, who's in the back, and Katie is role-playing the four. Basically, Vicky is asking questions about, it says name here, does that mean full name or just first name? And Katie is only allowed to respond with the answers that are in the form. So she goes, name? Yeah, but which one? Name? Really, really, really good. And far better at determining micro-interactions and micro-copy than the wireframe is. It could be that you all have a big stand-up workshop, you stick cards on the wall, and the deliverable that comes out of that is photos in your wiki or pinned up to your project space walls of the decisions you've made. It could be clickable prototypes, especially if you're going to testing. It could be that you sit and pair with a designer or a developer for an afternoon, and you skip a whole stage. You go straight from sketch to code, or you go straight from sketch to Photoshop, because you can share the understanding much better. It could, in fact, at the right time, for the right purpose, be a wireframe. And if you've made those decisions, if you've asked yourself, is it the right deliverable for the right decision right now, then I'm okay with that. But ask yourself the question first, and make sure you're not wasting your own time. Thank you very much.